In today's video, we are talking about the design of the video game Jusant, a meditative action puzzle climbing game. We're going to break down the game by laying out its masterful mechanical and environmental sequencing that form a very compelling gameplay experience, resulting in one of my maybe all-time favorite games. Hello everyone, my name is Simon, and on this channel I give you a wider and deeper understanding of the whole world of design. If you like this video, make sure to click that like button as it helps tell the algorithm to reach the masses, and make sure you are subscribed to my channel to not miss any of my upcoming videos. Jusant was designed by Don't Not Studios and was released in October of 2023. The game is fairly short, taking an average of 5.5 hours for the main story and 8 hours for you completionists out there. Jusant is a meditative action puzzle climbing game that features easy to grasp mechanics with a compelling narrative that is discovered through the game's environment. The game is divided into 6 levels or chapters, each one featuring a unique biome with notable features that move forward the story and the gameplay. To capture and communicate this masterful sequencing within this game, I will discuss each chapter in order and break down the gameplay and environmental features that caught my eye as a designer, so you can get a sense of how these elements build on each other as the game progresses. Our discussion of chapter 1 is considerably longer than the rest of the chapters as it introduces the foundation of the game, while all the other chapters are shorter as we are discussing the development and alterations to this foundation. This video is going to be long, but I really wanted to be thorough with the analysis. And believe me, I could have made it longer. I have divided the video into chapters in case you want to jump to a particular game chapter or see the video in chunks. Spoiler alert, I do discuss the full game. So if you're not ready to have full knowledge, watch half of the video, then come back. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 1. The game starts with a cutscene that sets up the context for the narrative and the framework for the level design for the whole game. As the main character is walking through what looks like to be a desert, the player is presented with a large tower. Taking a closer look at the tower and noticing that it is made of reef, alongside the numerous nautical elements scattered all around, you realize this desert is actually the sea, or at least it was. All the abandoned nautical elements alongside the visible architecture on the mysterious reef tower make you realize that this was once a heavily inhabited area. But with this insight, 2 main questions arise. What happened to the sea, and are there people in the tower? The player is also given a glance at a curious little blue creature that is being carried on the avatar's back, alongside the mysterious determination of the avatar to get to the tower. The player has been presented with an overall question and a clear direction. The cutscene is paired with a beautiful score that confirms the tone of the scene, an emotional frame of mystery and melancholy of a bygone civilization, juxtaposed with adventure and hope of being able to solve the mystery at hand. Once the cutscene ends, you find yourself starting the game at the base of this reef tower, already some of the way up. From a game design standpoint, this permits the designers to avoid the dissonance scenario of presenting an open landscape like the desert sea presented in the cutscene that cannot be freely explored because it has to be artificially limited by invisible walls that seem arbitrarily placed, affecting the player immersion. By starting in the tower, the characteristics of the scene makes it easier for the designers to limit the player's margin of exploration in a way that seems more natural to the environment. The player's first interaction in the game is going over a ledge by pressing the bottom face button and executing a simple gesture of climbing. After making you repeat this motion a few times, the player is introduced to what is going to be the core mechanic of the game: climbing. Once you're close to a vertical surface, you can press and hold any of the bottom shoulder buttons to start climbing. You then use a joystick to guide the free arm to an available graspable object and press and hold the corresponding shoulder button to have that arm engage. This in turn permits you to release the other shoulder button and repeat the loop until you get to the top where you press the face button to climb over the ledge. You get introduced to the stamina gauge, which appears only when you are climbing and which gets slowly depleted but automatically fully recovers when you're done climbing. The sequencing and rhythm of the motion sets in pretty fast, introducing the gameplay feel through a very engaged and meticulous input mapping. The rope itself showcases a spectrum of color that goes from blue to red, signaling how much rope is left, serving as a UI diegetic element. This helps the player gauge the limits of their climbing distance to be able to better strategize a path, since the player cannot engage in climbing without the rope being tethered. When starting a climb, the rope automatically tethers itself, which is noticeable as the only action that is automated and evades very meticulous, involved, almost laborious input mapping that the rest of the game requires from the player. This helps to completely avoid a game over state by never giving the chance for the player to fall further than the length of their rope. By not having a game over state, this permits the players to focus on exploring without really worrying about mistakes that are going to cost too much. And when you do fall because you missed a wall jump or your stamina ran out, the length of the rope can be extended or retracted by pressing the top shoulder buttons of the controller. Do not mistake the safeguarding of the rope as protecting the player from any cost at all from falling. Due to the very detailed input mapping, it is laborious to get back where you fell from, so the player is incentivized to get it right the first time. The player is also able to place pythons to mitigate how far they do fall. Every step of the way is guided by a minimalistic UI showcasing elements that are gradually added to the screen with enough time between them for the player to internalize each one, like the stamina gauge or your python availability. As the player moves along the level, the designers present a very curated sequence of scenarios to teach the player the basic mechanics alongside game heuristics. For example, when engaged in long climbs, it is recommended to place the pythons every so often to avoid falling and losing too much progress. As you use all of these climbing mechanics to navigate the game level, you're constantly being shown vistas out of the tower. This not only serves as opportunities for the player to admire the beautiful game environment, but it also serves as a measuring mechanic, like a progress bar, which is important as the player has no other clear way of measuring their progress up this massive tower. The game level design itself is very intuitive to navigate and is littered with subtle diegetic environmental markers to help guide the player, like old signage, objects left behind, scratches on walls, never letting you really get lost. The level design also promotes exploration in a subtle but clear way. It provides ways to loop through specific portions of the level. As the general level design of this game is vertical, the majority of these loops look like a place where you can drop down to previously navigated spaces to make sure you find special artifacts and spaces in the game. These artifacts and spaces are scattered all around the tower, and the more you find, the more pieces you have to put together the story of what happened to this tower. You're able to find letters and notes from the past inhabitants documenting their daily interactions and relationships, but also their struggles as they have to upend their lives because of the lack of water. You also get to follow the story of Bianca and her journey as she is trying to resolve the mystery and bring back the water. You also get to find seashells amidst the different types of abandoned spaces that trigger a cutscene relaying the past audible scenery of that particular space, creating a juxtaposition of the past and present. Refocusing the questions of where are the people, and playing on the notion that the seashell records the sounds of the sea. You're also able to find piles of rocks that were being balanced at some point to put the last rock on top, playing on the notion of meditativeness that comes with this and the function of saving the game and having a checkpoint. The overall soundscape of the game, from the environmental sounds, sound effects, to music itself, feel inspired and heavily influenced by the nautical landscape presented in the game. Lots of birds that sound like seagulls, lots of creaking wood and sails flapping, everything except the sound of water. Everything sounds like it is at or very close to a seaport. When you get to the end of the first level, you're presented with a cutscene that shows the avatar having to blow through some type of magical giant horn, alongside the introduction of the active participation moving forward of the mysterious little creature he has been carrying all this time, and an explosion of vegetation happening from this very magical moment. The cutscene functions not only as a memorable moment, but also as a clear point of no return and a clear progression step within the game. When you finish the first chapter, you're left with a clear visual and auditory landscape. The tower and environment are understood to not just be a mix of natural landscape and built elements where you have to explore and climb, seeing awesome scenarios and architecture, but also to work for by finding and piecing together the story of this place and its people. The tower, even though it has no water, anywhere to be found, is still full of life with little creatures moving about and reacting to the player. You're offered the opportunity to explore the environment, but it is clear when and where you can explore. It is not an open world scenario where you can and almost are forced to interact with everything to not miss anything. The way to interact with the world here are limited but meaningful. Overall, I find myself not overtly challenged by the navigation and mechanics of this game, but rather engaged just the right amount that I can enjoy the challenge presented while appreciating the game's visual scenarios and auditory landscape. Chapter 2 keeps all the themes and gestures of Chapter 1, but develops the narrative and the gameplay. For example, from the get-go, a new twist to the climbing mechanic is introduced. You can wake up and climb on certain plants. The interesting thing here is that the cutscene is not only used as a narrative tool, it is also used as a gameplay tool since the cutscene focuses and introduces the plants waking up and extending. The echo and the vision mechanics are introduced alongside the active participation of your little blue friend. The echo lets you interact with certain environmental elements like plants that you can awaken to help you in your climbing journey. And the vision guides you to important elements hidden in the tower through colored shadows in the distance. The introduction of this secondary character, even though it brings 2 new mechanics with it, in reality the impact is more emotional than mechanical. The player controls both the kid and the creature. Technically, there is no difference, but from a narrative standpoint, it does affect the game experience. You do not feel alone in this journey anymore, through the mere visual presence, but also by all the small ways you can interact with a small creature. And even though technically the player is also controlling the creature, the gameplay feels different now. It feels more articulated and slightly more complex, something very similar to God of War and the relationship felt through gameplay of Kratos and Atreus. One of the special spaces the creature's visions help you find are the shrines. These are spaces hidden in the game where iconography is depicting different aspects of the way of life of the past tower inhabitants. These depictions start giving you clues as to how the mysterious creatures mentioned in some of these notes you find called ballast might look like, how they seem that humans once lived in harmony with them and that your little friend looks just like one. Once close enough to them, you can use the echo mechanic to interact with them, making them glow and triggering a short but intense piece of music that makes the whole ordeal feel meaningful. This being very reminiscent of Journey's shrines. The other location that the ballast's vision helps you find are these rotating totems that you can trigger by grabbing onto them and spinning them, making detailed use of the input controller mapping once again, to make them momentarily piece together a complete picture while it's rotating, while emitting a beautiful water-like reflection onto the ceiling and triggering a sort of pleasant cacophony of nautical sounds. You also start perceiving all the water-based concepts and words used in the vocabulary of the mysterious tower people. As you keep exploring the tower and reading more about the story of these people, you start forming a notion of time between your arrival and when the people completely left the tower. You feel like some non-trivial time has passed, but maybe not that much that you might be able to catch up to them if you keep climbing up. The overall navigation of the level feels more articulated and is not as straightforward as in Chapter 1. Climbing paths tend to be broken into different elements like ladders and handholds, interjected by portions of rocks and voids. So even though the climbing path is predetermined, it is not visually evident at first glance, and therefore the player has to piece all these possibilities together to finish the climb, making it an engaging challenge. You start picking up on environmental cues that facilitate your wayfinding in the game, like knowing that whenever there is a carabiner on a wall, that is the place to go up. And this is an intentional wayfinding decision in part of the designers, because the pythons can attach to any surface, so there is no real need for the carabiner to be there. The player is required to start experimenting with combining and sequencing mechanics to be able to finish certain portions of climbs. For example, grabbing onto the vine before using the echo can save you a bit of the climb. As you're making your way up, the help text box still appears but less frequent, like advising you to rest in the mid of a climb or suggesting to use the echo in particular spots that you could have missed otherwise until you internalize these new mechanics. Other mechanics are also introduced here, like zip lining, double jump, elevators, walking on ledges, and going between crevices. And while you are exploring and navigating the environment with all these new mechanics, you never miss an opportunity to stop and look at the tower to see what new vistas you can see and measure how far up you have made it. And once again, when the player is finished with this level, a cutscene is used to make a memorable transition to the new portion of the game. In Chapter 3, the environment shifts to focus more on the remains of the civilization. It shows a lot of what seems to be their industrialized spaces, their farming and where equipment was built and maintained. It is more heavy on the presence of architecture. From a game level standpoint, the chapter seems to be more focused on exploration of the environment with what the player already knows than it is with introducing new mechanics like in the previous chapter. The climbing paths are longer and more challenging than before, having you explore different combinations of the mechanics to make these longer climbs. There are also new challenges presented, like the sun affecting your stamina by depleting it faster than before and creating an analog to exhaustion. With paths being longer and the avatar getting tired more easily, the designers introduced the relays. These are anchoring points you find in the middle of climbs where you can reset to keep going on your long climbs. These relays help to extend the duration and the height of the climb paths without requiring any sort of level up system for the player. The sun not only affects the player, it also affects some environmental elements used for climbing, like the chutes that are activated with the echo from the spider plants. The ones in the shadow stay, but the ones in the sun after a short period of time burn away. This acts as a time factor pressure that was not felt previously in the game. This is a twist of the known, something that is done continually and in a very pleasing way in this game. Relays, the sun, and dehydrating plants are not the only new level design mechanics introduced. We also have the rock crabs, which the player can grab onto to move up. Once the player grabs one of these crabs, they only take you so far up until they stop and force you to grab onto another crab to keep moving up. This makes it so the player is always engaged and attentive to the overall patterns of movements of these crabs, creating an engaging dynamic experience. Due to the longer climbs, the player becomes more conscious of the resource management that this game is all about. Stamina is limited and affected by the sun or whenever you jump by being depleted for the rest of the climb until you can rest. By climbing, you already use your stamina. This makes you have to be more methodical in your choice of climbing paths. The placing of the anchor points also becomes more important. Since it is a longer climb, you might run this risk of using all your anchor points too early in the climb, and when you are further up, you no longer have anchor points and your stamina becomes dangerously low. Overall, Chapter 3 feels like it brings a focus onto the environment you're climbing by giving you these longer and more challenging articulated climbs and by not introducing too many new mechanics or variations. The story develops as you keep finding more notes, letters, and artifacts, and as you keep exploring the architecture of the past civilization as well as taking in more vistas. The environment here changes drastically as you go into the tower, as you have not done so before. The environment is cavernous and you feel the wetness of the sea inside here. You feel water for the first time in the game. The architecture feels like it's a residential or commercial district with small mom and pop shops on the corners within a tight communal streets and alleyways. You also get to see a lot of bioluminescent elements like plants and fireflies overtaking the built environment. The sparks introduce a new mechanic where the player can call upon them with the echo to have them lift the avatar up a certain amount before letting him drop. It's like a jump, but the game feel of being lifted by a natural component of the game in this tower makes it feel different. It feels like you're in tune with nature and nature is willing to help you. The use of the sparks is also notable as they would not make sense in any other environment we have seen so far. They need the darkness of the cavern-like setting to stand out. This is also a mechanic that feels very different from the rest in the sense that this game has a focus on having the player interact with the input mapping in a very detailed way than other games, where triggers are for each hand and so on, but here with the call of an echo, the player can effortlessly move up and it feels outside of the player's responsibility, a bit like the automatic rope tethering when climbing. You still have to be very aware how far up these sparks are taking you so you can grab onto whatever is there at the end of the help at the right time to avoid falling back down. The sparks also function similarly to the carabiner on a wall, showcasing the same utility by helping you identify the correct path. Whenever you see a swarm of these sparks, that means that you are to go up at that spot, which is interesting how variations can be introduced into the game that adapts to the environment while maintaining the same function. Another mechanic is introduced in the game: you can open doors. Now, there is no real innovation in the opening of a door in a video game, but I want to bring attention to how tactile and detailed the designers have made this interaction too. They make you work more than other games to open the door, which by default makes it more involved than just pressing a single button like other games do. In Chapter 4, not a whole lot of new mechanics are introduced, but the change in the environment is drastic enough that a lot of the focus is taken by the mere exploration of this new environment and all its beauty. Chapter 5 takes a sharp turn turn for mechanics, environment, and narrative. Chapter 5 for me felt like the most intense chapter of them all. Environmentally speaking, the landscape goes from being dark and inside caverns to outside. But it's not the same outside that we have been experiencing so far. In this level, the environment has a lot of lush vegetation. The natural landscape doesn't feel like it's dying. It doesn't feel dry. It actually feels humid. It feels like it's recovering and even thriving. You're left to wonder if this is because we're getting where supposedly the water might be, or maybe it's because of the cumulative positive effects of these horns that we have been sounding. Even though the newfound greenery seems very positive, this is juxtaposed with very aggressive winds. The wind is seen as very strong and sporadic, changing directions in a moment's notice. And the game level is littered with artifacts such as windmills and flags, as well as the long grass itself that lets you perceive the direction and aggressiveness of the wind. And no better representation of danger would fit the bill for a rock climbing scenario than wet rocks and strong winds. You also immediately notice the overall reduction of human presence in this environment. Seems like only the very necessary technology is located at this level. From a mechanical standpoint, the climb feels very intense and dangerous. When exposed to the high winds, your stamina gets depleted and fast, even if it's just to hold on in place. This new dynamics has you looking for a refuge to find cover and timing your climb as you go up. The sporadic winds also affects your jumping capabilities, which makes you have to coordinate when you're jumping, as it can help you enhance or severely inhibit your jump. Overall, the climb in this chapter feels like it's full of danger, which makes you slow down and be more cautious. In the background, as you keep making your way up, you start to hear the ballast cry echo somewhere in the clouds near you. Not your little ballast friend, but a big one. This, coupled with the overall less presence of technology in this level, lets you feel like you are at the edge of where the tower people made it. This is where the ballast feels comfortable enough to be in, and you are here. It also makes you feel like you are arriving at the goal. This creature that keeps being referenced everywhere as a solution to these people's problems, and that somehow they couldn't find it, is near you. The narrative and the gameplay intensifies when you get the chance to actually see and climb the ballast, as it offers you to take you all the way up. This is also the moment when you confirm that your mysterious little blue friend is a ballast, which raises a whole lot of questions about how did the avatar find it and why was it so far away from the tower in the first place. Once you get on the ballast, it rapidly accelerates towards the sky, leaving you with the task of not falling from it and climbing it. As you climb it, you notice all the debris on it, nets and harpoons, as well as other assortments of items that serve as your stepping stones to not only help you climb, but to understand the story of this particular ballast and how it once was hunted but never captured. If you took the time to explore the environment and gather enough notes and letters, you're able to meditate on the relationship of the tower people and this ballast. How the mysterious disappearance of the water drove the people to the edge of their existence, making some venture out into the dry sea, or made others want to hunt the water creatures to harvest water without having to leave. Once you make it to the top of the ballast also makes it to the top of the tower, and you are presented with yet another highly contrasting environment, an astonishing snowy landscape against the night stars that resolves the mystery of the location of the water. Shortly after, the ballast seems to succumb to some sort of weakened state due to the cold and falls into the snowy hills at the top. Feels like the ballast has sacrificed itself for us, and as the avatar makes his way down, it feels like he knows why, as his acceptance and gratitude of the ballast sacrifice is communicated, which is something to note. Even though we are the avatar, we don't know what he knows. It seems like we're never given full access to all his knowledge, which is interesting, as normally when we're given the role of the avatar in an RPG, we're also given all the knowledge and background they have, making us feel like we are the avatar to some degree. But with this game, that link is not as strong because of this knowledge barrier, which is a different avatar-player relationship that I hadn't experienced before. Chapter 5 is an overall short chapter, but due to how intense its gameplay and narrative is, coupled with the environment's contrast, it feels the most impactful of all chapters. Chapter 6 feels like the most contrasting of all chapters. Aside from the environment itself, where we start in a very dry and full of daylight level, and we move towards cityscape, caverns, lush vegetation, to now its most extreme contrasting point, a horizontal, open to the night sky, snowy landscape. Verticality versus horizontality is for me the biggest design element here. Throughout all the game, our general direction has been vertical. All our mechanics are to facilitate our movement upwards, and now it's horizontal. And the designers want you to feel this horizontality as the walk from the ballast to the tower takes a minute and there's nothing to climb, you just walk. As you walk, you're given the opportunity to absorb this new landscape, to wonder about the giant floating water sphere above you, to consider all the frozen water under you, and ponder why is it all up here. To feel the openness, to focus on the small tower ahead of you. Another contrasting point, this whole time we have been navigating a tower too big for us to comprehend in its entirety, but now we are presented with a small tower, a tower that we can capture in our visual field in its entirety. It's almost as if the big tower had everything, but this small tower has one thing, the solution to the mystery. The design of the tower itself is also very different from what we have been seeing so far that is human-made. It is a standalone structure with ballast iconography carved into it, mixed with some sort of rails that light up when you interact with them. The tower has cracks, giving the impression that it has been here for a long time. The technology and material of the tower itself suggests that this tower is beyond the people of the Reef Tower. As you start climbing the tower, the small overall navigational patterns repeat. You climb the exterior of the tower for the most part, with specific moments where you go into the tower. The scale of the tower being smaller makes it where it's easier for us to comprehend it better in our minds, in contrast with the big tower, which is so big that we can never see the entirety of it in one frame, making it hard to establish boundaries to determine scale. This small tower feels more like a puzzle I need to figure out than an environment I need to get through. The climbing of the tower also feels like it reverts back to the basic climbing mechanics of the first chapter. It's like the gameplay tones down so you have a chance to appreciate the narrative closing. As you make your way up the tower, you find the last horn to sound, but this time it seems like you will not have your little friend's help to make it sound, as it seems he, as well as all the other ballasts that are buried in the snowy landscape, are affected by the cold, rendering them extremely weak. This leaves you in a tight space since for all the other horns you have needed the help of the small ballast. Somehow the avatar makes the horn sound and the ballast reacts by waking up and presenting the culmination of the narrative and the game. The big ballast look like they were waiting for the small ballast to be returned to them, and as they make their very emotional and intense ascension to the sky, the player is left with a lot of emotions but also with a lot of questions. Just as the beginning, the end is not revealed in detail to the player. A lot of questions are unresolved. How do the avatar and the small ballast know each other? What is their story? How did the avatar know that he needed to get to the top of the reef tower? Was there enough water to replenish the sea? Amongst dozens of more questions. The end does not reveal the details of the resolution of the story, but it is viscerally clear enough that you understand that you have done what needed to be done for the game to end and the narrative to be resolved. Jusant ends up being a high-quality, relative short game that focuses on creating a unique gameplay feel focused on an emotionally charged environmental narrative. Its low poly, stylized visual art coupled with the high-fidelity soundscape are all brought together by the amazing musical score to create a truly impactful game experience. Its level design prioritizes direction without sacrificing exploration. Its mechanics are masterfully introduced and paced in a seamless sequence of actions that create a natural flow. Its input mapping is very detailed and articulated without being overwhelming. Its story is immersive and communicated from different vantage points, from personal perspectives to environmental elements, but ultimately operating at a visceral emotional level. With that said, we have arrived at the end of the video. Let me know in the comments below if you have already played Jusant and what are your thoughts on it. What are your favorite moments or things you would have done differently as a designer? Also, let me know what other games you might like to see me do a similar design breakdown like this one. If you liked the video, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, consider sharing this video with your friends and family. With that said, I will see you in the next video.